So, ladies and gentlemen, XXL puts out a freshman list every year. They've been doing it for almost 20 years at this point. They put out this freshman list of more or less 10 artists that they're saying are going to be the next up to have a wave to make some noise within hip hop and hip hop adjacent genres over the coming years. And just like I view it just like how you would view like a draft in sports, where you got some people who everybody thinks is going to be good and they live up to their hype. You got some people that people kind of doubted and underestimated, and then they exceed all expectations. Then you got some people who end up being bust, who everybody thought would be good, but they suck, or they just, fall off for whatever reason. Then you have some people who kind of are somewhere in the middle, like a rotational player, people that got their lane, but they didn't really live up to that potential, but they're not bust either. And it's an interesting activity to do once a year, is to look at the artists they put up there. They try to act like you could vote for the artist, like the last spot for the artist, but we all know that's cap. Like all of that's predetermined. But I wanted to do a video talking about 5 artists that I believe are some of the most underrated out of all of those freshman classes that have come out over the past 18 years. And when I say underrated in this context, I'm talking about artists who either didn't reach what I thought would be their full potential based on their talent, or artists who did have a pretty good run, did have an underrated run, but either in general they're an underrated artist, or there are artists who people kind of forget were on the freshman list in the first place, because it is easy to forget all the artists that have been on these covers, because they've been putting out covers since 2007 for the freshman list. I think in that time period between then and now, they've only skipped like 1 or 2 years. So that's just a lot of people to remember. But either way, I'm gonna get right into the list now. So the first person I wanted to put up is Big Crit, an artist who was on the class of 2011, where some of his peers in that class were YG and Kendrick Lamar and Yellow Wolf, and I believe a couple of other people. It's an interesting class, but Big Crit, an artist who really came into the scene and picked up steam during the late 2000s, going into the early 2010s, during the peak of like that blog era where you had blogs like Two Dope Boys and DJ Booth and all of that stuff, as well as the peak of datpiff.com, which was a mixtape website I used to go on all the time, especially when I was in high school. Like every day I would just come home. That was just a part of my routine. Come home, go on DatPiff, and just listen to a bunch of mixtapes, even if it was from artists who only had 10 views. Like there was so many artists who had 10 views who I would check out, and they would still have dope music too. That's part of the reason why I wish more people now would be more open-minded, because you can find a lot of gems that way. But Big Crit, he blew up with mixtapes like Crit Was Here, signed to Def Jam. He got on this cover. I thought he was gonna be in that upper echelon as far as, now we call it, see, a lot of people who may be too young or too old don't realize that in the early 2010s, what people are now calling like the big 3 of like Kendrick, Drake, and J. Cole, it really wasn't a big 3 in like 2010. Like it was, yeah, those 3 guys were like the guys who people assumed would probably have the best chance of like being the front runners and being the main guys, but there was also a group right behind them or right next to them of guys like Big Crit, as well as other people like Wale and other people like that. And I feel like Big Crit, I thought he was gonna be much bigger than he was, because of the fact that he's so talented, rapping and producing his own tracks. He's an underrated producer, definitely an underrated rapper. And in my opinion, he's put out several classics. Like Crit Was Here was a classic, but also Forever Is a Mighty Long Time, which is an album that he dropped in 2017. That's low-key one of my favorite albums ever. Definitely one of the better albums out of any of the XXL freshman classes that have come out in the past 15 years. He's also put out some solid bodies of work like Cadillactica and Live from the Underground. However, in my opinion, I think Def Jam didn't do a good job of marketing him and really getting him to that next level, so it didn't really work out. He never really went mainstream like that. He still has had a good career. Like I said, he's put out several dope bodies of work, but it just, again, I feel like he's underrated because I don't think he reached the the peak that I think he could have or should have reached, but it is what it is. That's how things play out. Next person I wanted to get into here is Denzel Curry. He's from the class of 2016. That's low key for a lot of hip hop fans. 2016 seems to be like one of their favorite classes ever. We have guys like Little Uzi Vert as well as 21 Savage and other people. But I think a lot of people forget Denzel Curry was on that list as well. Denzel Curry, a guy coming out of Miami, another dope artist, has a very aggressive in your face style. I feel like he's still underrated to this day. He's had some success as well, but I don't think he went as mainstream as I thought he could have gone. But again, he's still built up a fan base. He's had several dope bodies of work, like his project Taboo, as well as his Zoo. And again, another guy who I think is underrated. But the next person I wanted to talk about who I think is underrated is K Camp, who's from the class of 2015. And I think K Camp, for the most part, reached his full potential. Like, K Camp was definitely one of those dope melodic rapper artists who made a lot of club bangers, a lot of party bangers. But in my opinion, I think he was one of the best at doing it, especially during the early to mid 2010s. He's from the class of 2015, by the way. He had, in my opinion, several classic songs, whether it be Money Baby or Cut Her Off. I think those songs, if you hear it to this day, it still sounds dope. I think if you hear it 8 years from now, it's still gonna sound dope. And that's just a couple. He had songs like Comfortable. Like, he had a very underrated run during the early to mid 2010s. The next artist who I think was underrated from the XXL freshman class was Tierra Whack, who was from the class of 2019. Tierra was a very unique, eccentric type of artist. Like, so I'm not super surprised that she never went mainstream, because sometimes when you're that unique and that different, sometimes it can be hard to make something that really connects with the masses, something that's palatable for the masses. But at the same time, I am shocked a little bit that she didn't find at least like 1 or 2 years of catching a mainstream wave, because even though she is so unique, I just think that she was a dope artist that had a lot of dope songs. Her mini project Whack World was still to this day just a fascinating project to not just listen to, but also just to watch. Like, the visuals, because that's another angle of why she's so dope, is like, clearly her and her team, they put so much attention and detail into the visuals, and it becomes kind of like an experience. She created her own world essentially, and I feel like she's definitely underrated for that. The last underrated artist I want to get into here is Dizzy Wright, who's from the class of 2013. This is another artist that I really liked a lot when I was in high school during the early 2010s. He put out a lot of dope mixtapes like The Golden Age and Smoked Out Conversations. He signed to Funk Volume, which was a record label started by Hobson and also Damian Ritter, who was the brother of, I believe the other guy, his name was Swiss. Funk Volume looked like they were going to be a very big rap label slash collective during the early 2010s. They had so much momentum from so many of these guys, but unfortunately things went left with the label after they signed a joint venture with Warner Brothers, so it didn't work out. Unfortunately, Dizzy was on the label, so as it's going left, he's kind of in the midst of that. So he never reached the full level, the full potential I thought he could have reached as far as like mainstream popularity. Because all of these artists I'm listing, I think I have to make it clear, I do think that they reached their creative potential, like they reached their full creative potential. But some of these artists, I just feel like they didn't reach that mainstream pinnacle that I thought they all had a chance to get to at some point or another. And Dizzy Wright's another one of those guys. Like, out of the Funk Volume group, label slash collective, I feel like Dizzy Wright had when it comes to his song making ability, he had probably the most balanced out of the crew. He probably was the guy that I felt like had the most potential to go mainstream when he would make some of those not poppy, but some of those like songs that feel like they're clearly meant to be club bangers or hit records, like the song Floyd Money Mayweather, or the song Fashion with Kid Ink and Honey Cocaine, I think was her name or whatever. But again, it just Busy never really hit that next level in mainstream popularity. He still put out dope bodies of work since then. The Growing Process was a dope album in my opinion, and also he put out the Golden Age 2, which was dope. And then he also, in about 2019 or 2020, he put out another dope album called Nobody Cares, Work Harder, which I still listen to that to this day more than any of his other projects. I think that may be his magnum opus, to be honest with you. It's a very dope album. Songs with like More and More, as well as Grateful, as well. Either way, regardless of these people not reaching their full potential, these are still artists who have had solid careers and have found lanes for themselves. But let me know, which artists from the XXL Freshman list over the past 17 years do you think were the most underrated?